we can go to this pad that we've got, which is like a really nice kind of Supersaw type pad. Just using a bit of sidechain in here from this duck plugin. And then we'll add a little bit of this in. And you can just hear that whisper. I love this Apollo mode because it's actually Apollo Lunar Lander, and I kind of liken it to, you know, it almost sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, essentially, like, you know, a mission to Mars or something like that, or Interstellar. And, you know, it's got that real nice wispy kind of tone to it. But you can also use things like, say, for example, I absolutely love things like the VHS machine. That's a real favourite of mine. Like I mentioned before, I've got a few VHS emulators, and I actually used to have a VHS machine with a battered old tape that had an audio in and an audio out. And believe it or not, I used to send things out of Ableton into the VHS and then return it back and then print it. This is far easier than trying to find an old VHS player in a charity shop or in a thrift store, especially one that has an audio in or out. That was quite an effort, and it doesn't take up as much space, thankfully, because it only takes up screen real estate. And plus as well, you've got so many more options here, so it actually sounds a lot better than doing it the old school hardware way for me anyway. So again, you've got the tone control here. If we just focus in on this pad in terms of the noise, I can almost embed it as part of the pad. And this little follow function here just allows me to have the level fluctuate along with the sound itself. So say, for example, if I was to filter this all the way down, you'll notice on the little waveform readout, we get more or less noise depending upon how loud the signal is. So you don't have to worry about offline editing or anything like that. Again, the duck will also give you ducking similar to a sidechain. Flux is really, really useful in this situation. So you get more randomness. Really nice. You always try vinyl as well there as well. Does add a bit of low end, especially with the tone being what it is. Just dial it back a little bit there. And maybe we can add a bit of wobble. Love the wow and flutter here. Absolutely gorgeous. And I'll have slightly different fluctuations pitch-wise for the left and right channel by hitting this stereo button. What I can also do here is just set this to about 50%. And you get a lovely kind of chorus. And again, what's really nice here is that you can actually, you know, get a really lovely, you know, automatable feel. I absolutely love automating RC-20. It gives me so many more creative options than I would have had otherwise. So again, just being able to, let's say, for example, this is like a 16-bar chord progression on a pad here. I could go to envelopes, and I could go to this wow and flutter, and I could start here. And let's say, for example, I could just manually put a little bit of automation in just to drop that back in. Do something similar here. And then maybe just crash it a little bit more here. There we go. Yeah, like that. And then we just do a little bit of work on curvature, shall we say. And we can play that again. So we get a more intense element as it goes up to the end of an 8-bar phrase, which I absolutely love. We can add some distortion to that. Go for the iron again. Makes it a bit more mid-rangey, quite nice. Again, adds a bit more flux to that. And one of my real favourites here is the digital. So this is honestly one of the best Bitcrushers I've ever used. Like, legitimately, like, I would buy this plugin just for the Bitcrusher. Honestly. So useful, really creative, so much control, and, like, eminently automatable as well. Again, put a bit of smoothing on. And just add a little bit of crunch and a little bit of edge there. You can tell I'm on a completely clean install of Ableton, and I've got no Max for Live effects. I was looking for an LFO because I was going to put a Max for Live LFO on this digital and just have it undulate. This is how fresh my install is of Mac OS on this new Mac Mini. I still haven't downloaded all the Max for Live stuff. Anyway, the wonders of live broadcasting for you there, kids. So ultimately, you know, I can obviously, you know, I could do a similar element here. You know, I could actually do a similar kind of element. So let's say, for example, I take that and I go across the whole of this clip. So I can do something very similar using Ableton automation. So I could do right click, insert shape, and you get this lovely undulated perfect sine wave, which is quite cool. Let's just go back to where that's meant to be. And again, I can do that proportionately. So I don't actually, if I just shuffle that to the side, I don't go absolutely, you know, crazy with the digital. I don't want it to be, you know, incredibly, shall we say, like, you know, extreme. I just want it to shuffle down a little bit like that. And again, you've got that long undulation. Again, we can just adjust the mix. Add a bit of flux in there. And I really like this as well, the ability to actually put the focus on certain frequencies. And then maybe we'll drop that a little bit. And then what we can do is actually have this cut icon, or this cut button, which means that actually it cuts out the unprocessed frequencies. So what you're actually hearing there in the digital is actually only the frequencies that were being processed by the module itself. Whereas I can have it blended like so. So again, like, let's listen to it in both modes. You might not hear that much of a difference, but it does really help with the processing itself and keeping it clean. So yeah, you get less of that, so it moves more in line with a peak here around about 4 bars. Yeah, so you get that nice little undulation. So you could go in a slightly different direction here. You could go like this, and then from here you could go like this. Super simple. Select the whole thing. Sort of range bound it, shall we say. So we get these lovely little undulations and peaks and troughs, and we get a bit more action, shall we say, as we go through. Really, really clever. These automation shapes in Ableton are very, very, very underrated. So there's a little Ableton tip for you as well. And again, pads need space, and there's a lovely reverb / resonator in here. Super useful for making mono sounds more stereo, because you can actually have a stereo reverb. So push a mono sound into it completely down the middle of the stereo field. It'll help open things up. So that can help with mono compatibility. one of the things that I really focus on as a mix engineer and as a mastering engineer for other artists is the fact that most material needs to exist in clubs. Therefore, you've got to make sure that the mono compatibility is on point, because most club and big PA systems for nightclubs and festivals tend to be mono for various reasons that are too boring to go into today. So again, this helps open out a sound while still giving you mono compatibility, so it'll still sound great on streaming, on Beatport, wherever it is that you're going to have your music. So again, pads need reverb. And we'll just dial back on that Bitcrusher and keep it nice and shall we say, delicate. Really cool. And again, I'll just roll off and just focus some of the frequencies more onto the mids and the high end. So really cool. Great sounding reverb, gotta say. And then finally, you've got magnetic. So magnetic is great for these kind of like really tight, kind of like wow and flutter moments. Again, wow and flutter is all about recreating inconsistencies, pitch and level wise, from analog hardware like tape machines, for example. And this is like a more extreme version of wobble, shall we say, because you get things like audio dropouts, that kind of thing. I personally really, really love using it for things like these types of sounds and being able to actually get, you know, some really, really interesting modulations that you would struggle to replicate basically on a synth, even though you are using a fantastic synth like Serum. So you'll see what I mean now. You're already getting modulation there from the wear. Almost like a vibrato. Put that to 100%. Lovely. Great for builds and tension. It's pretty ridiculous what you can do on one sound. I mean, we've just used this pad for the majority of that. So we've got all of those options, and it just opens out any sort of sound. And honestly, it really does open out things for things that were previously set. Like, what I mean by that is like audio files that you can't edit, but you can add an element of modulation to preset and pre-recorded audio files. So let's have a little listen to our main sort of thrust. Just a great granular sound in pigments that I've kind of tweaked. And that Apollo sound's working really nicely. So I can put the follow on. Air pressure's great on that. You see how quick and how immediate it is? You're just into it straight away. And say, for example, if you want to try and blend things relative to one another, you've got the magnitude control, which I haven't talked about yet. So the magnitude control, you'd actually be forgiven for thinking that it's a dry wet. And it kind of is, but it's kind of a bit more than that. Rather than it being a standard dry and wet, if you keep an eye on what are affectionately known as the big knobs, hopefully that won't get us taken off YouTube, me saying that, you will see the light, or shall we say the indicator, around the rotary control that shows how much of the processing is being applied. So if I turn this magnitude control down from 100%, you'll see it reduces, but it reduces in a very interesting way in that it maintains the relative difference between all the different modules in relation to one another. So what that allows us to do is get different looks. And the interesting thing here is, especially when you use this in combination with, you know, modulating things like the input gain. So the input gain will obviously change the input characteristics into each module, which means the behavior will change, especially when you talk about modules like distortion, right? Distortion, it will give you obviously more distortion, it will give you more non-linearity, it'll be a heavier handed sound. So what you'll need to do is hold command, and actually what you can see is that there is a relative gain staging going on between the input and output. So that means, say for example, if I decide to put 12 dB into this, it will take 12 dB out of my output, which means that I get all of the advantages of the processing, and then I don't get any of the, you know, nasty bits, like having to throw my headphones off my head because I've just deafened myself, because I've hit play at the wrong moment and I've put too much gain in and I've clipped everything and destroyed everything, including my relationship to my own music. So this is quite a useful thing because, again, it's scaled by magnitude. So it will change these characteristics. So you can change the input gain upwards while changing the magnitude downwards. So we can have a little bit of a go with that now. You'll be able to hear that now. It's slightly more gnarly sound. And again, back to nothing. So again, subtle changes there in this kind of setup. However, again, think about automation through the context of an entire record. You've got the ability to change the magnitude amounts, inputs and outputs. You've got that at the tips of your fingers, essentially, which means that you get this lovely, again, morphing, expanding, contracting, constantly moving, constant ear candy, because the way human ears work is based on difference, not just whether or not there's a signal there or not. Notice how if you hear a sound consistently for a few seconds, your ears and your brain kind of get together and decide to ignore it because it's not changing. Lots of interesting psychoacoustical reasons for that. However, this is not the forum for that. A conversation for another day, shall we say. So this is really coming together quite nicely. And again, just a little bit of space on here. Again, I'm using an adaptation of the preset that I've already got here, changed into the air. Really like that. Don't really want to wobble it too much, if I'm being completely honest with you. So I'm probably going to drop that down a little. Quite cool. This is that with the pads. Super atmospheric, and you very quickly get used to the sound of RC-20, and that's almost like your minimum accepted standard for a track, so it's kind of hard to not use it, quite frankly. I mean, I know XLN Audio have got products called addictive drums and addictive keys. They should really have called this addictive sound design processing, although I think RC-20 is probably a bit more catchy as a title, so that's why I'm not employed to name products. You heard it here first.